Hi, my name is Meagon Nolasco. I use they and them pronouns. I'm a proud Troy resident and the founder of Color City Pride, Rensselaer County's first operating and based LGBTQ plus focused nonprofit. And you are listening to Troy's Story, a podcast for the Color City.
Hello and welcome back for another episode of Troy Story, a podcast for the Color City, where we explore the history and people of Troy, New York, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, John Salka. For those keeping track, this is Chapter 8. 55 years after the Stonewall riots in New York City, a moment widely recognized as the flashpoint for what became the LGBTQ rights movement, the Color City hosted its first ever Pride Fest at Riverfront Park in downtown Troy in July of 2024. The event was organized by Color City Pride, a Rensselaer County-based nonprofit that offers peer support, training, and social services for LGBTQIA2S+ individuals. I was fortunate to have the founder of Color City Pride, Meagon Nolasco, they, them, on the podcast to discuss the inaugural Troy Pride Festival, lessons they learned, and what's ahead for the organization and festival for 2025. Meagon also dissects the City Council's recent vote on Pride Month and the importance of speaking out on local issues affecting Troy's LGBTQ community. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We appreciate the reviews and those 5-star ratings, which help recommend the show to new listeners. As always, you can also check out our full episode archive at troystorypod.com. Now, without further ado, our conversation with Meagon Nolasco of Color City Pride. I am so happy and appreciative that Meagon is here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
All right. For those who don't know or weren't aware of the Troy Pride Festival, can you tell us a little bit about it and how did it go for its inaugural year?
Yeah, it was a phenomenal experience. It was also equally phenomenally hot, if anyone was there and remembers. But we had a great time. We started planning Pride back in December of 2023. That's when we launched. And it took us, a solid 6.5 months to plan that festival. And we saw about 700 people in the park that day. We had an array of folks who were performing and entertainment. What I think is really special, though, and what we tried really hard to do was we wanted a local festival, right? We wanted to include as many folks from Rensselaer County who were also queer folks in our festivities. And every single performer that we had on stage was local. We had 55 vendors, 45 of them were from and based in Rensselaer County, and 90% of them were queer folks. So it was a really beautiful festival, and I'm just honored that I was able to bring it to the park. Myself and my team, I want to highlight, it was not just me. I would not have made it by myself.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the specific types of activities and events and music that you had? Are there specific highlights that immediately jump out at you from this inaugural year?
Yeah, so the community was really good to us. And I say that because, a Pride Festival is an expensive event to put on and host. And this was our first year, not only hosting Pride, but this was our first year as a nonprofit organization. We just got our nonprofit status back in May. So the community was very good to us. And the way that manifested, we were able to have an entire kids area. We had face painting, we had balloon animals, we had the local Girl Scouts troop that were doing crafts, we had drag story hour. And then we were also able to have yoga on the other side of the park. We had our vendors all throughout the middle. Our entertainment was a mix of drag performers and local Troy musicians, local DJ. So I think there's not one moment that really stood out from that day. It was just really nice that we were able to bring a little bit of something for everyone, aside from the heat.
So this was 9 or 10 months worth of planning to put an event like this together? What did it involve? You talked a little bit about your partners, but what did it involve putting together something like this for its first year?
Yeah, so am lucky enough to have a little bit of institutional knowledge. 2 years prior to that, my job was working with the Pride Center of the Capital Region, which included hosting and helping with Capital Pride, which is a 25,000 person festival. Troy's was a little smaller than that. So I took a lot of that, institutional knowledge of kind of how to go about the logistics of a festival, right? Permitting, um, setting up vendors, setting up portals for everyone to kind of filter in through. But we started planning this in November of 2023. And at that moment, it was really just kind of a thought in my mind. I was like, how cool would it be if we had a full fledged Pride Festival in Troy? We're really lucky to have Troy Pride Night Out. They had their second event this year, but I wanted something that felt like a festival. So we started planning in November of 2023. Me and my partner, who is a willing, maybe sometimes unwilling co-conspirator in all of this work. And then in December, when we launched, by that time we had crafted a 10-person planning committee, which was essentially folks who I had met with in my work at the Pride Center, my own friends, my own colleagues, who I went to and said, hey, what do you think about this wild idea? And 10 people came back and were like, let's do this wild idea. So it was about 8 or 9 months of solid planning. It did not go perfectly, right? It was our first year. The most difficult part, I would say, was the vendor process, due to the permitting process of the city of Troy. If anyone is familiar to the permitting process for special events, it was a little difficult, but everyone was very gracious to us because it was our first year. And we were able to bring in 55 vendors. We brought in 15 different sponsors, all in our first, year of creation. So I thank my team because I don't know how we could have gotten here without it. And I really thank the community for believing in us. We're brand new. Who the heck is Color City Pride, right? And I think we were able to really connect with folks on a community level and share with them what we wanted to do. And they actually saw that that's what we did at the end. So I'm hopeful that they'll come back next year
Sure.
because we made good on our word.
You mentioned the Capital Pride Festival, and I don't know what year it was. I'm assuming that it sounds like you've been involved or attending, so it sounds like you learned a lot of lessons from that longstanding sort of institution, and I've marched in that parade a few times with different organizations over the years, and it is a huge, hulking event. I mean, I don't even know how many volunteers, let alone participants, are involved in the parade and the event itself in Albany, Washington Park. Did you take away any lessons from that festival, and do you have any lessons learned for this year for Troy Pride Festival 2025?
I'll start with the lessons I learned because it's a smaller
Sure.
list than the lessons that I've taken with me into the next year's Pride. So, Capital Pride is a massive undertaking. And as far as how many volunteers, that was actually my job when I worked there. So we usually had about 100 volunteers throughout the day for Capital Pride.
Wow.
And that included for the parade, the festival, think of all the vendor space. There's a beer tent there. There's entertainment. That's a whole crew of folks. So it takes a lot of people. And that is something I brought with us to Troy Pride. One of the first things that I launched on our website was a volunteer inquiry form because I knew that we would need a lot of folks to make this happen. And we had about 20 volunteers at Troy Pride, in addition to our 10-person planning committee. So we had about 30 folks that were helping us that day. The thing that I am taking with me into Pride of 2025, which this is a hot take that your listeners get to have first dibs on. I'm not going to give the exact date, but we are moving Troy Pride out of summer. That is the one trick. There's many, but that is the one that is at the forefront. Not just because July is hot, June is hot too, right? We all know the summer months are warm, but the day that we held Pride, it was 90 degrees. It was 95% humidity. It's unsafe. I feel like it's unsafe. And I don't feel like it's fair to ask performers and volunteers and people, the community, to come out and walk around at a festival for 5 hours when it's that hot. And we did have some tented areas where we had seating for folks to kind of cool down, but the lesson that we've learned, and we also put out a feedback survey after Pride. So between that feedback, our own team's feedback, and just the way the day felt, we are officially moving our Troy Pride Festival out of summer and into early fall next year.
Will it also help with just the stack of the different sort of Pride events that also happen at the same time? I mean, there's so much celebrating. Even just to have it in July, I guess, is an offset because Pride Month is traditionally June. But I imagine that will probably give a little bit of breathing space too.
Yeah, it does. You know, I like to coin myself as a professional queer, which I've stolen from my previous mentor, the executive director at the Pride Center, where when you are working in a professional queer capacity, we don't get to celebrate Pride Month like other folks, right? Because we're working it. And because it's Pride Month, there are events every single day, every single weekend. There's numerous festivals, which is wonderful. We saw so many new smaller towns and cities this year pop up with their own Pride Festival. It's beautiful. But it is a lot to ask folks in the community to pick and choose between all these events. So I think that will be helpful. And we still are going to host. This past year we hosted a Pride picnic in Prospect Park in June. That was kind of our June event. But it's a big focal point of ours to focus on Pride being a season, right? Pride being all year. And we did that when we pushed into July. And I think we're going to do that even more when we push it even later in the season. That's kind of what we wanted to do with moving it out of June, is just focusing on the fact that Pride is all the time. We get a lot of visibility in June, and that's great. And it's an important month to remember. But October is LGBTQ History Month as well. So
I did not know that.
Yeah, October is LGBTQ History Month. It also hosts, I believe, National Coming Out Day. And in November, we have Transgender Day of Remembrance. So we have queer holidays, I'll call them queer, special moments to remember all throughout the year. But June has been and become this kind of rainbow capitalistic month, so to speak, where, from June 1st to June 30th, everybody is queer affirming, queer accepting. We've got a rainbow in every logo. Now, I love that. I love to see that. I think awareness is important. And I think it's good if you are a large corporate entity and you want to pour money into queer organizations during that month. But I also would love to see that in August, in January. So that's my hope as we kind of push our events a little further outside of Pride Month.
And you touched on it there. You said you had there was Collar City Pride, there was a picnic, and there were a few other events. And I know you also have some post-festival events, town halls, and I know you've sort of done these pop-up bar events. I'm sorry if I'm not characterizing them correctly, but there seems to be sort of an orbit around the main event that is there to solicit feedback from the public on the event and to keep people engaged year round, right?
Yeah. We hosted a lot of events this year. I am a social worker by trade, but honestly, at this point, I should open up my own event planning business because I've taken on that role so much. The Pride Festival was our largest event, but even leading up to the Pride Festival, we had a book swap, we had a drag brunch, we had a drag bingo show, we had a meditation group that met. We also do, some trainings in the community and things of that nature. But we like to have events monthly, right? At least one or two events monthly. And we try to focus on having a pretty equal split of events that are sober events, right? So not held at a bar.
Sure.
And then events that are, traditional events that we host at a bar. So we have coming up on October 5th, our next Ambush Troy, which is our queer bar takeover. And this is our second one that we've done. And kind of the premise of that event is we don't announce the location of the bar we're taking over until the week of the event. This time it's a little fun because we have drag performers and we're actually announcing them tomorrow, Sunday, the 22nd. So, we do that. And then we also have our book swap coming up, which is held at the YWCA in downtown Troy and is a completely sober space where we have cookies and coffee and people bring in their books, take a book, bring a book. And we've had a lot of engagement. We have not had an event yet where no one showed up. I don't know how that keeps happening. I credit it to our team and our marketing, but I am surprised every time because I always go into our events with the expectation that not one person will walk in the door. And every time we host one, we have at least a decent crowd. If not, every show that we've had that's been ticketed, we have sold out. So
That's great.
we're trying to really not create, that's a bad word to use because we're not the first ones here, right? We're not coming into a space that has nothing that is queer related, but we are trying to work with the folks who are already here doing events. You have folks like Queer Inclusivity Social, they're hosting events regularly in Troy. You have the Pride Center of the Capital Region and Cafe Euphoria, who are kind of like staples in the community. And then you have us who are focusing in our nonprofit realm on human service and case management and substance use, and then also focusing on creating queer community spaces where we get to come and be together. And moving into next year, into 2025, we're finally expanding out of Troy. So we'll have a couple of events and services out in Averill Park because we do serve the entirety of Rensselaer County. So.
Right, even though it's Collar City Pride, there's a lot of other communities that are on the immediate borders of Troy and beyond. Rensselaer County's growing. There's a lot of people living here, and there's a lot of people, I'm assuming, that are LGBTQ or allies or just supportive or have family members that would probably be interested in coming to an event in their community or coming to the biggest city by population in Rensselaer County to celebrate, not just in the summertime, but all year round, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we try to extend our scope to the full amount of Rensselaer County, but Rensselaer County Pride didn't have the ring that Color City Pride did. So
certainly does not. First time listener to the show? It's okay. We won't tell. Don't forget to check out past episodes of Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and everywhere podcasts are available. You can also explore our full archive at troystorypod.com. I want to put the context of Collar City Pride, but more specifically the Troy Pride Festival, in context of the city of Troy itself. It's a city that's been around for 200 years. Pride itself goes back to Stonewall, which I think is 55 years ago. I don't remember exactly how many years ago it is now.
I think we just surpassed 1969. And my math is not mathing, but I think 55 may be correct. But 1969 is the year.
Sure. And obviously, here we are in 2024. This is the first time that there is a Troy-specific citywide, or I guess countywide event specific around Pride, around LGBTQ, celebration of the LGBT community, contributions of LGBTQ people, Americans. And you nailed it that there is also there have been other Pride specific events. Downtown Troy does their Pride Night Out, but it seems like now there's really, I don't like to use the word normalization because that's clearly not the right word, but it's just become part of the fabric. It's just another one of those weeks or months or celebrations or events that you come to expect. There's the Pig Out, there's Riverfest, there's Rockin' on the River, and now there's Pride Night Out, and now there is going to be every year, hopefully, there will be the Troy Pride Festival, depending on where it falls in the year now. It sounds like we're moving out of the summer, which is probably good. But I think that's really important to note that here we are, Pride being a regular recognition event moment in the city.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I've lived and worked in this area for about 4 or 5 years. And Troy is such a phenomenal community, not just our queer community, but our community as a whole really comes together in a way that I have not seen in places like Albany or Schenectady. Those are other places that I've lived and kind of done some community work. And the community in Troy really comes together. And when we first launched Collar City Pride on the premise of hosting a Pride Festival, it was terrifying for me because I was very concerned that we would step on people's toes, that people wouldn't want this. You know, we knew about Troy Pride Night Out. We tried very hard to connect with folks locally in the community who had already been doing the work to say, hey, we've got a team together. We would like to do this. What's your input? What are your thoughts? Do you want to help out? Do you want to be a part of it? And it was, you know, I also want to be very, as a social worker, the social worker in me wouldn't let me leave out that this was a lot of hard work, to do the community outreach, to do the marketing needed, to do the fundraising needed, and to try to craft something that had not been done before, right? That we didn't have a blueprint to go off of, aside from some institutional knowledge and some really helpful queer folks in the community. And what happened in July when the festival was finally up and running and going was more than I thought it would be. I really thought that after all these months of planning, as I go into every event, I'm like, no one's going to show up. No one's going to come. We're not going to have anyone here. It's hot. I'm hot already. It's 7 a.m. and I'm setting up and I'm sweating. And instead, what we had was so many folks from the community who not only came and enjoyed, but came up to our booth and thanked us. There was an individual from In Our Own Voices who was tabling at the event. And as they left, I was, taking down our tent at the end frantically because it was 4:45 and I was exhausted at that point. And we had an after party after Pride that I had to go to. So I was just trying to get everything done.
Oh, God.
And they walked up to me and they thanked us for, the event. But what they said that really resonated with me was that they looked around the festival and it felt like a local festival. And I think that was probably the best compliment I have gotten in the 9 or 10 months we've been around, because that was my goal. That is something that myself and my team talked about early on. About Pride is beautiful and wonderful, and it's great what it's expanded to, right? From Stonewall to 2024, 1969 to 2024. But I think there's also some pieces of Pride as a whole that we have to reflect on. And the biggest piece of that is the corporate involvement in Pride festivals, right? You see it at any very large festival where the festival is sponsored by Absolute or Southwest or Walmart or, and New York City, I think, is a prime example, right? That New York City is where Pride as we know it now started. And when you look at the New York City parade, right, or you look at their festival, it's heavily corporate sponsored. Now, New York City versus Troy, right? Very different dynamics. A lot more people, you need a lot more funding. But I really wanted Troy, when people came to the festival, when the community talked about us, to know that we had reached out to them, right? To sponsor, to volunteer, to be part of our events. And that compliment that we got at the end of the festival from another queer organization who's been doing the work for 25 years, it was just really heartening. And that to me is what I would like to see Pride moving forward, is that we steer a little away from the corporate sponsorships, right? I'm not saying don't take the corporate money, take all of their money, especially during Pride Month, right? What I'm saying is don't take their money and then put them as your prime sponsor on the banner that everyone sees when they walk in. When you came into Troy Pride and our banner was on the stage, the sponsors that you saw on our banner were 9pen, Cafe Euphoria, and the YWCA. Those were the only sponsor logos because those were our presenting sponsors for Pride. So that local aspect is something that it's very important to me, and I hope that we can continue moving forward as kind of a theme in our festival.
Like what you're hearing? Share the love and leave a review. According to the internet, we're told reviews are the most effective way to help suggest our podcast to other listeners. Oh, and please share this episode with your friends, family, or that special person in your life. They'll thank you for it, and we will be forever in your debt. Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. Catch new episodes each month on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and everywhere pods are cast. I've lived in Troy now for almost a decade, and I worked for Mayor Rosamilia and then later Mayor Madden, and it was a great job, and I loved working for the city, and one of my favorite parts was engaging with residents, everyday people, business owners, and everyone that was from Troy, whether you're from here or you relocated here, whether you're a transplant, you're a recent arrival, you've lived here for a decade, you've lived here for 20 years, or, otherwise. Everyone just had a really strong interest in the city, in the community, in their neighborhoods, and the things that were going on that were important to them. I was very proud to be involved with getting the first Pride Month declared in the city of Troy in 2019. Should have been done earlier, but it was so great to be able to do that in 2019 for the first time. And it's crazy to look back on 2019 and think that was the first time in the city's 200-year history that we had recognized Pride Month, but we did it. But 2021, we raised the Pride flag in Riverfront Park, which was, at the time, was tied in with the Pride Center and our own voices. We were trying to really emphasize that Troy is part of the broader Capital Region community when it comes to recognizing Pride Month, recognizing LGBTQ community and the contributions of not just celebrating Pride, but recognizing the contributions of those from the community who've done many great things to move Troy forward. And that was really valuable to me. And I'm not saying it for self-aggrandizement, because I think ultimately it was about shining a spotlight on a subsect of the population that in Troy had not gotten that specific recognition from the local government ever. And I think that's important. And I'm glad that it's being carried forward.
Yeah, I think folks, when they hear about proclamations, it might seem frivolous or silly or unnecessary, right? Because we live in Troy and we know Troy is an accepting community. But I think having those official proclamations, those official statements of June is Pride Month as declared in Troy every year unanimously, except for 2024, we'll come back to that. I think it's important because there's awareness in that, right? There is news that is following that. There are stories that are coming out about that, so that folks can read in their local newspaper, in the Troy Record, that we did the flag raising today in Troy. If you're a youth in school who's queer, who maybe doesn't have the most accepting family or is struggling with bullying or discrimination or stigma, you read that news story and you think, wow, okay, they're talking about us. We're in the newspaper, right? Now, that might seem like a really long stretch of a path to get. It's not, though, especially if, Troy, as you mentioned before, Troy is the most heavily populated city in Rensselaer County, which means that folks who are living in places like Averill Park or West Sand Lake or Brunswick or Stephentown, they're probably traveling in for things, right? They're not going to be traveling in for things if they never see themselves reflected in the community. And that is why I think these types of proclamations, these types of votes, these types of stances taken by our local city council are so important, because they really help bring some awareness around Troy, for the most part, being an affirming and accepting place until 2024.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring it up anyway. What you're alluding to is the vote by the Troy City Council in 2024 to approve the standard annual LGBTQ Pride Month proclamation. 2024 was not unanimous. And you went to the city council meeting in June, I think it was June 6th. You went and spoke specifically about the lack of unanimous consent around the proclamation, approving it by the city council. Can you sort of explain what happened?
Yeah, so I can't remember the exact date, but June 6th sounds like the proper date. But a friend of mine had let me know that they were voting, that they had already done the vote, that one person had voted no, which again might seem small, but if you look at the history of the city council, typically members are voting along party lines, right? Dems are voting with Dems, Republicans are voting with Republicans. This vote was only voted no by one individual. And I wanted to shine some light on that because I think it's important to hold our elected officials accountable and to be able to ask a question of why, right? Why would you stray from everyone else in the council to vote no on something that really it doesn't affect our budget or it doesn't affect any local laws or right? It's a statement. It's a statement piece. So I went and spoke to try to address this individual who really coincidentally wasn't at that meeting. Um, and I say coincidentally as a joke because we had, as Color City Pride, announced that we would be there to speak, and had shared with other folks in the community if they wanted to come as well. And he wasn't at that meeting. I actually ended up calling this elected official who's, and I swear this is not on purpose, whose name I can't remember because I don't.
Bill Keel, I think.
Yes, Bill Keel. Okay, thank you. That was not intentional, but called him afterwards just really to kind of level and figure out where the no came from, right? To see if maybe this was something his constituents had asked for. And then we have a really bigger concern of an entire district in Troy that made such a stink about a pride proclamation that their elected official voted no against it. So was really coming at it from a place of what happened here and why, and what work can we do as a Color City Pride to assist in this. Because I'll tell you what, if I lived in that district, I live in District 2 in Troy, but if I lived in Bill Keel's district and I saw that no vote as a queer person, I would be a little alarmed and I would want to know why. That call didn't really lead us anywhere. Bill was very concerned that I did not live here because I have an out-of-state area code. I'm originally from Southern California. I've kept my phone number for the last 8 years. But did share with me briefly on that call that his no vote was due to folks coming to him from his district telling him that they wanted this to be voted no. I tried to ask if this was, was this a large group of people? Was this the majority of your district? Really just questions to figure out what is the problem here. And I didn't get any more information on that. But yeah, it's really alarming when you see these kind of rogue elected officials, right? Something that maybe jars or piques your curiosity. My advice in these situations is always run with that, right? Because too often we don't hold our leaders accountable. And sometimes it can be exhausting to do that, right? It can be exhausting to show up at the city council meetings and essentially talk into the void and hope that it goes somewhere. But if you have it in you, do it. Please do it, because and do it next year. Come out next year. Color City Pride is going to be following this for next year, seeing how the vote goes, hopefully getting a group of us to come to, that city council meeting that aligns with that, especially from that specific district. But being involved in these types of local votes, it's important because, as I mentioned earlier, the way that seeing that the flag raising is happening by a youth who reads it in the newspaper, the way that is affirming for them and gives them a sense of ease is the same way that I'm sure at least 1 to 2 queer folks in that district saw that he voted no as the sole vote in that proclamation and are now concerned and maybe even voted for him, But I think it's also, and this is something that I reminded Mr. Keel when I spoke to him, even if someone did not vote you in as an elected official, you serve them, right? You don't only serve the constituents who voted for you. That's not how that works. So just something to keep in mind for anyone out there who may be wanting to find a way to get involved in queer awareness and moving the needle a little bit. Local is where it begins. Pay attention to your local elected officials.
I just kind of want to end on looking ahead because I think it's important to sort of end on a more optimistic note, perhaps, or a more positive note when it comes to the future of LGBTQ recognition, or more specifically, Color City Pride and the future plans of the organization in Troy and Rensselaer County. How can people get involved in not just next year's festival, but the many events that are sort of planned in between next year's?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, please come. If anyone's listening to this, come to any of them. I love a good crowd. So you can find all of our events on our social media. That's our most active platform. We're on Facebook and Instagram, both just as Color City Pride. You can also find our list of events as well as our mission, vision, and values. Any news that's involved Color City Pride, you can find that on our website. Again, very simple, colorcitypride.org. And then for folks who maybe want to get involved in volunteering, give us an email. If you go to our website and or any of our social media, there will be a Linktree link or a direct mail link that'll get you to our info inbox. Again, simple, info@colorcitypride.org. There was a theme here when I started this organization. And also, please just, if you're interested in one of our events, if you're looking for community, please give us a try. Come into one of our events, see what it feels like, see the folks that are there. We've had such amazing conversation with folks in the area who often tell us they're just happy that we're here. Our events are pretty low stakes. Aside from events that we run as fundraisers, they're usually on a sliding scale or a donation only, suggested donation. So we try to provide as few barriers to get folks into events. But yeah, keep up with us on social media, keep up with our website. We have a lot of really neat stuff coming up next year, including, a moved Troy Pride Festival date and a vamped up Pride picnic in June. So we have a lot of great stuff coming up in the new year.
I have been continually impressed by the organization's social media presence, the how rapidly you communicate, how effectively you communicate. There's clearly a group of people around you helping ensure that emails and messages and social media, they're all interconnected. Your branding and your graphic design, it's so good. The logos are great. I just was really impressed when I first heard about the organization's formation and as it grew in profile leading up to the event. I really was impressed, and I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same way and are excited for next year and all the events in between. Is there anything else that you want to mention or discuss before we sort of wrap up?
I think I've rambled quite a bit, although I will share.
I ramble way more.
I will share. I'll give this again as like a hot take, but I'll actually give details. We haven't announced this officially yet, but we will be hosting a 1-year anniversary party. Our anniversary is coming up on December 6th. That's the day that we launched. And we are hosting an anniversary party at 9 Penn in Albany. And for folks who might be thinking, oh my God, that's across the river, I just want to remind you, we can travel across the river, no matter what Times Union told you in that one article. And also 9 Penn was a presenting sponsor of ours for Pride. So it seemed kind of kismet for us to do an event there. So keep your eyes out for that. We're going to be having some local Troy performers there, DJ, dancing, all of the purviews of 9 Penn, cider and appetizers. So keep your eyes out for that. That's our next pretty large event.
Meagon, thank you so much for doing this. I've been speaking with Meagon Nolasco. They are the founder of Color City Pride and the Troy Pride Festival. It's been a privilege.
Thank you, John. This has been great.
Thanks again to Meagon for joining us on the pod. They brought a valuable perspective to the work of Color City Pride and how we can all get involved to support equal rights for all people here in Troy and Rensselaer County. If you're interested in learning more about Color City Pride or find some of their upcoming events, check out their website or find them on social media. We've included links in the show notes and on our website, troystorypod.com. We leave you now with a preview clip from another upcoming episode of Troy Story, a podcast for the Color City that looks back on a visit by President Barack Obama to Troy, New York in September of 2009. This clip features Tom Wade, former chairman of the Rensselaer County Democratic Committee.
A few nights before he was scheduled to be here, I was driving out I live in Troy, and I was driving out to the town of Sand Lake to speak to the town of Sand Lake Democratic Committee. And as I'm driving out, I received my cell phone, received a call, and the name of the caller that popped up was the White House. I said, well, I got to take this call, whatever this may be. So I pick up the phone and I'm on the phone and I drive by a sitting state police car on the other side of the road. And I'm sure you could see me on the phone. I didn't pretend not to be on the phone. So he puts his lights on and he starts chasing me. So I pull over and I finished the call with the White House. It was about the president's coming arrival. And the trooper said to me, "Do you know what I pulled you over for?" I said, "Yes, I do." And I said, "Would you believe I got a call from the White House?" He said, "No, I wouldn't believe that." I said, "Well, that's why I stayed on the phone. So
Until next time, love yourself, love one another, and may Pod save Troy. Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, is hosted, written, edited, and produced by me, John Salka. Our theme music is by Stephen J. Goldman at Four Legs Records. Like what you heard? Please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. This is incredibly helpful for getting others to find our show. Want to know more? Visit TroyStoryPod.com to see upcoming episodes, guests, and bonus content. Thanks for listening. The views or opinions expressed by guests are their own and not of the host or Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City.